Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Out of Nowhere. Well, my special guest today is John Ventre. John is a multi-state director for the Mutual UFO Network. It was John's research into the end-time prophecy and cultures that got him interested in UFOs in 1996. God, that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Can we please welcome John to the show?
Hey,
Hello there.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me on again. It's been 30 years I got into this field. And, it's funny. I was writing a book on end time prophecy. And that's how I got into the UFO field, because I come across some things talking about flying shields and getting knowledge from space beings and stuff in my research. And it's been 30 years. I thought I would just do this and write a couple of books and then move on to something else. But it's like once you get into this, you can't get out of it.
There's two things before we start going into the Flatwood case. Tell us about your Democrat. You're a Democrat.
No, I'm not a Democrat. I'm a Republican.
Sorry, a Republican.
Yeah. If I was a Democrat, I'd have to kill myself. But I ran for governor 4 years ago in Pennsylvania, and last month I ran for lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania. And I was thinking, if you look at people in the UFO field, the ufologist, nobody has run for a high office in America since 2002. So that's 24 years. Stephen Bassett ran for Congress. So I've run for governor and lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania. But, it's 24 years since anybody has tried to run. And, my candidate, he did bring up the UFO stuff. And, he did a couple of commercials and tried to portray me as a UFO nut. But, he runs these commercials the same day that Trump releases the UFO files. But, people still fall for that. And, originally there was a guy in the 1960s. He ran for president. He ran for senator. I think Green was his name. But very, very few people in the UFO field run for office. And I did. I won. I live in the Pittsburgh area. I won 5 counties here in Pittsburgh. Really? Yeah. And I almost won Philadelphia. I got 48% of the vote. But I'm heavily involved in the political side. So, that's over with now. I didn't win last month. So there we go.
Well, you never know what's going to happen. Tell us a bit about the Knights Templar.
Yeah, well, you can see the flag behind me. I'm just so tired. I became so tired of turn the other cheek Christians. I'm a Christian. I go to 2 churches, Catholic and non-denominational, for different reasons. And I'm just so tired of people, and it's mostly the men. It's the women are angry, the mama bears, I call them, because they have to protect their kids and their family. And women know when you lose power, what happens to women. They're not like men that can fight and defend themselves, But I see all of these men here in Pennsylvania. They're so weak. They really are so weak, and they don't fight, and they always want to compromise with progressives and the far left. I don't want to compromise. I have no intentions of compromising. I intend to fight these people. That's why I run for office. I want to crush them because they're, the things they believe are just they're not healthy, and they're not Christian. They hate the country. I don't know why anybody supports them. They're perverts, basically. But so what happened was 3 years ago, I flew over to Northern Ireland, Ulster, and I was knighted there by a group that's there. They only got about 300 or so knights. They go back. They go back to the original knights, 700 years ago. And I've bought a bunch of their swords, and they have some cool books, the history of the Knights Templars and everything. And so, that's my personality. I don't turn the other cheek. You get in my face, then I'll get in your face. You draw first blood, I'll knock you out cold. That's just the way it is. I took 3 years of kickboxing. But, the funny thing is the last book I wrote, I've written 14 books. And every time I write one, I say to myself, that's it, I'm not writing anymore. Then I write another one. So I wrote 3 last year. And but the last book I wrote, it was such a cool idea. It's called Templars versus Indians. So I was thinking to myself, I was watching that movie Prey, where Predator comes back and fights the Native Americans, So I'm thinking about that. I'm sitting there and I said, you know what? How cool would it be? Because, I originally said, well, if the Vikings came over, and I said, no, how about the Templars? That's a couple of hundred years closer. That after, that whole incident in 1307, when they left and went to Scotland, Portugal, Cyprus, that 3 ships come over to America, but they get separated, but they not only fight the Native Americans when they land, the Native Americans then call upon their gods. Because I give a presentation on Native American folklore, and the American Indians here, they've got, 20, 25 creatures that they believe in. Bigfoot, Wendigo, shapeshifters, werewolves, witches, two-faced, all these different, they got some crazy freaking creatures, right? So it's a novel, obviously, but I know the history of the Templars, and then I know the history of the Native American folklore. So I combine that into a novel, and then you got the Templars here in the woods every night battling these creatures. I mean, it is such a cool book, And the second half of the book is on the hollow earth theory, which is something people don't talk about anymore. It goes back to the 1600s, 1700s. But I wrote about, maybe 60 pages on the hollow earth, summing up all the theories and my beliefs that stuff is more interdimensional. And that's where all of the preternatural things, the cryptids, the UFOs, all the stuff is Earth-based. It's not from space, So that's a little bit of an intro for you.
I like that. Yeah, next time you come on show, we'll have to talk about that book.
Yeah. I just published it a couple of months ago. But it's a fun book, I figured I would try to, around here in Pittsburgh, there's a lot of Bigfoot people and conferences, probably more popular than UFOs, even though I run the Pittsburgh conference for 19 years. So I figured, I write this and it's about cryptids, so that should appeal to them, hopefully they buy my book at the conferences.
I like it. Tell us a bit about the Flatwood case, 1952.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I went down to Flatwoods over the weekend. I was invited down to speak, and when they asked me, it's about 150 miles from where I live. When they asked me, I said Flatwoods. I said absolutely. I said Flatwoods was the first out-of-state lecture I gave in 2008. That was outside of Pennsylvania. I drove down to Flatwoods, and that was a big conference. It was Stanton Friedman, Frank Frascino, Bill Burns. There were a couple of lesser-known people there, but that was just cool because it was where I first gave my first out-of-state conference. And with MUFON, I was the Pennsylvania, West Virginia was. I had 7 states, but West Virginia was 1, so I would go down there a lot. And I was in charge. I was an executive with UPS, and I had Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia. So I know West Virginia very well. So I haven't been there in 15 years or so. So, when they asked me to talk, I said, yeah, I'll go down. I was also in a movie called Flatwoods, the Flatwoods movie in 2002. Jamie Lockhart was the one who produced that movie. I gave him a little bit of money as a co-producer. So I said, yeah, I like Flatwoods. I go down there. It's a cool case. Very interesting, So the thing is,
what first convinced you that the Flatwoods case deserves a serious investigation?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a guy, Frank Frascino, and he was the one that invited me to speak. But he wrote a book called Shoot 'Em Down. And I'll give you the whole background of, this is 1952. So 1952 was the summer of the saucers, flying saucers is what it was called. Because besides Flatwoods, there were 10 states with 112 UFO encounters, flying saucer encounters back then. And so that's why I'm saying there's a lot going on there. But Frank Ficino, he's a good friend of mine. I got to get him up here to speak at my conference, But
Yeah.
to go back a little bit, because that's September of 52. But if you go back to July of 1952, that's where this really starts. You had 2 weekends in a row, there was the third and fourth weekend of July. You had 10 UFOs fly over the Capitol in Washington, D.C. It's picked up by 3 radar stations. We launched fighter jets from Delaware to go chase them. And every time the jets went up, the UFOs would just take off. And the jets went back. UFOs came back. They went back up, because it's over the Capitol.
Yeah.
And Truman actually issues the shoot them down order, which is why that's the title of the book, Shoot Them Down. But he says to them, if you can't talk them down, shoot them down. So imagine being the pilot in the fighter jet saying, well, how do I talk them down? Like,
Yeah.
what language? What language do I use? Do I use that clicking thing that, how do I talk them down? So that order is still on the books. It was never rescinded to shoot down UFOs. So Frank, in his book, he goes into the fact, he did a lot of research, really interesting research, looking at our airplanes. We were fighting North Korea. So we lost 83 planes in Korea during the Korean War in 1952, right? But we lost 62 planes in training missions off the coast of the United States. So think about that. How do you lose 83 planes fighting and 52 planes just training? You would have to be training people that never flew before, like myself. Yeah, then I would crash.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense. But here's the thing that really got my attention. Frank looked at the pilots, and none of the pilots ejected from the planes. You have 2 pilots in the plane on the training missions off the Atlantic. They didn't eject. All 124 pilots died.
No.
That makes no sense. That tells you they were shot down. So, even though, Truman said shoot them down, they maybe because they were shooting us down is why he said that. So Frank's theory is that on September 12th, there was an air battle off the coast, and we hit one of the UFOs. That caused it to crash land into West Virginia, which is, that's about 300 or so miles inland off the coast. That's why that UFO landed in Flatwoods. And, the theory is that later in that early morning, a second UFO came in, hovered over the other one, did some sort of repair, and then the 2 left. Now, somebody else said that there were 180 National Guard on the scene, but I asked them that at the conference. There were some people there who knew, and they said, no, that's not true. But I thought pretty sure I read that in Frank's book, that there was 180 National Guard. But, the Project Blue Book explanation was that it was a meteor that crashed. And then the creature that the kids saw was a barn owl, which,
Oh, yeah.
doesn't make sense. And, in my presentation, I show a video of these 10 UFOs flying, above the Capitol building. And, Project Blue Book said it was a heat inversion. And what you actually saw were the reflections of street lights in the sky because of the heat inversion. But, and it made the front page of the Washington Post, that picture of the Capitol with them. But then like how would you see them moving if it was a heat inversion? That doesn't make any sense.
It makes sense. No, it doesn't.
Doesn't make any sense. So basically what happened was in Flatwoods, it was 7:15 p.m. And, I'm thinking September, so it's still light out until about 8. So they saw this red fireball slowing down across the sky. there was this woman, she was probably, 35, 40, Kathleen May. She grabs a flashlight. Gene Lemon, he's a 17-year-old National Guardsman, and two of his friends. And then a bunch of the local boys, Eddie and Freddie May, Neil Nunley, Ronnie Schaefer, and Tommy Heyer. Sounds like all good British names to me,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't hear any Italianos there,
Oh, God, my God.
Yeah, so they all run out to where this thing went down, So now it's, it's probably dark or dusk. It's dark at this point. And the family dog went too. So, they go over the hill, whatever. They get to the point where they see this red flashing in the woods. They see a red light kind of flashing. They know something's going on. So then the dog runs ahead as they're approaching, and then the dog runs right past them. That dog going running 30 miles an hour back to the house. And this is what I tell people. You can always trust the reaction of animals. There's no thought involved. There's no lying involved.
No.
If the dog starts barking, something's there. If the dog runs, well, there's something there scarier than the dog, and the dog's hightailing it out of there. You can always trust the dog. So they approach the craft, and in the woods they see a creature approaching them. So this thing, it's got like a hood on, and the hood is like the shape of like the ace of spades, like that shape. And it's a cloth type hooded outfit, but it comes to a point like a ace of spades. And the thing is hovering. So it's hovering off the ground. When I said to the crowd, what do you know of that hovers? If you're in the paranormal field, the only thing I know that kind of moves without walking are ghosts, So there's something very paranormal to this creature that they run into. It's hovering. Its hands are claws. It's got long nails and claws. There's a sulfur smell. And again, I told them I've done a lot of research in demonology and ufology, and the sulfur smell is something you get in both of those. It's got an orange face, glowing red eyes, and light beams that come out of the eyes. Its body is green. It's 10 feet tall. That's huge.
That is huge.
Yeah. And some people said that it was a robot, either a robot or it was some sort of reptilian, inside, that's the outfit or something it was wearing, a robot or a reptilian. So, I'm telling these people, you probably never heard my version because I've taken a real paranormal view to a lot of this. And I said, you know what, we're going to segue into, let's take a look at a different view of this case rather than it was just a craft and aliens. But the thing splashes oil on Mrs. May. Like I said, the dog ran home. There's a green mist around it. As it glides, it's hissing. It's got a hissing sound as it's gliding. And later on, though, that evening, I should say, the kids got sick. Their throat was really irritated from the sulfur, and some of the kids were nauseated and were throwing up. The police arrive, hours later, and they say there's no evidence, right? They didn't see anything in the woods. Project Blue Book investigated it. And, it's interesting. I live about 8 miles north of the Kecksburg crash. And Blue Book never investigated the Kecksburg crash, but they investigated this one. So now, Well, Blue Book didn't involve Kecksburg because I proved with an engineer back in 2015 that Kecksburg was a spy satellite. It wasn't an alien craft. It was a GE Mark II. It was a spy satellite launched out of Johnson Island. We explained every aspect of it. What people saw and described matched up with this satellite that was launched. And so the reason Blue Book didn't show up was they knew what it was. And get this, in Kecksburg, they claim that the U.S. Air Force didn't see it on radar, but Canada picked it up on radar. Come on. If Canada picks it up on radar, we got it on radar. And,
of course we have.
And 40 minutes after the crash in Kecksburg, the military's there. There's a Nike missile site in Irwin here, and it's a solid half-hour drive to Kecksburg. Maybe it is exactly 40 minutes, I'd say, from that site to that. So they immediately notified these guys to go to the crash site. So come on, Blue Book. They knew the military was involved in this, and it was ours. But that's a different story for another time. So then it wasn't only the Flatwoods case. It wasn't that one case and on that hill. There's another report by an Audra Harper near Heaters, West Virginia. That's about 5 miles north of Flatwoods. And she reports seeing a ball of fire and a tall silhouette type being. She only saw the silhouette of it. What's crazy? In 2009, I woke up at 5 a.m. and there was this being standing at the end of my hallway. I saw it from my bed at the end of the hallway. He was backlit. His head was above the door frame, so he had to be 7 feet tall, over 7 feet tall. Tiny waist, maybe about a 12, 14-inch waist, long arms and legs, just standing there, and it was backlit silhouette like that, and she said she saw something similar to that. And so then the next day, there's a location called Strange Creek. That's a perfect name to have a sighting. Strange Creek. Strange Creek. So you got George and Edith Snitowski. Their car stalls, and there's a sulfur smell. Again, sulfur, right? They see a bright light, a hovering reptilian creature just kind of hovers over to the car in front of them, puts its hands on the hood, and is looking through the windshield at them. Well, can you imagine how scary that would be back in 1952?
Oh, that's scary.
No, even today it'd be scary. But back then, people weren't exposed to, what we see in movies with special effects. So Flatwoods, the media is involved in this. Right here, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette sends a reporter down to cover it. Gray Barker, who's a big name back then in West Virginia, he goes down to investigate. Ivan T. Sanderson goes down to investigate, two big names in the field. And the national press rated the Flatwoods story number 11 of the year. So think about that. You got the North Korea War going on. That would have probably been number one story, I'd imagine. But
Would, yeah.
Yeah, but it's rated the number 11 story of the year. That's huge to be that popular and rated that way. So, one of the other things I told the crowd was that if you watch the Project Blue Book TV series back in 2019, the first episode was Flatwoods. And I remember how cool they did that episode with the crash. And the thing with that Blue Book series is they didn't stick to the true facts of the cases. They took each case and then they embellished it a lot and just made it more entertaining. But the Flatwoods was the first episode of the 2019 Project Blue Book series. So, some interesting other side facts is if you go back to 1947 with Roswell, 2 months after Roswell, the Air Force was formed. Whether that was a coincidence or not, but it was. So a couple of months after, in 1952, after that Washington, D.C. incident in July, and right around this Flatwoods case, the NSA, the CIA, the Air Technical Command, and Project Blue Book are all formed right after that DC case. I don't think that's a coincidence,
No, I don't as well. There's a question in the chat room there. It said, Did John get any info in mind from the tall being in his house?
Oh, well, it was interesting in that, I wake up and, I say, I wake up, I see this thing standing there, and I rub my eyes, I'm looking at it, I slap my face, saying, well, it's not like I was dreaming and, that's a dream. I mean, I'm awake. So I crawl to the footboard. So I'm 6 feet closer to the thing, even though it's
Yeah.
down the hallway, it's 25 feet away from me. I'm looking, I said to myself, well, there's somebody standing there. And it had a square head too. I had the impression it was wearing a helmet, and I said to myself, you're taking kickboxing, step over the footboard, charge it, and hit it as hard as you can.
God.
And this is the only time I ever heard a voice. In my head, it said, you don't want to do that. It might be unsafe. You want to step off the side of the bed and put the light on. And, I'm working for UPS, safety first. I said, okay. So I step off the side of the bed, put a light on and go, he's gone. So I walk down the hallway. This is 5 a.m. I walk down the hallway, and the cleaning lady was there that morning. And I'm looking on the rug to see if there's any footprints. Something 7 feet tall. Even though it was real skinny, he's still got to weigh more than me. I'm 6 feet tall. So I walk back. So I walk past my Doberman twice there and back. He's laying on his little bed there at the top of the stairs.
Not moved at all.
He didn't wake up. You can't walk past the dog and he don't wake up. You make any noise, any movement, the dog's going to wake up and acknowledge you,
Okay.
So it reminded me of like the abductions where the woman is being abducted by the alien and the husband's laying right next to her sleeping and snoring and she's screaming, Tommy, wake up, and he's out. That was my impression, is that, so people said you might have been just abducted and they returned you and that's why you woke up, so then, you go to try to sleep and it's like you open your eyes, right? A minute, 30 seconds, close your eyes, 30 seconds later, you open your eyes. I see a light outside of the house and, coming through the windows, and then it moves away, got dimmer, and it was gone. So, it gave the impression of a craft, a plane, something. There was no sound like a helicopter. So it was really strange. Was that an alien? The UFO friends say it was an alien. I say, I'm not sure if it was alien. Because 5 years prior to that, there was something in the house. I had gotten divorced back in the mid-90s, but, my kids, I always drove to New Jersey. I brought them out here a couple of times a year. But so my kids are over, and my girlfriend moved in with me. And it was Thanksgiving night. We watched the football game. So we go to bed about 12:30. The kids are in their room. We're in the master bedroom. I closed the door. So it was right after I closed the door, lights are all out. I hear somebody walking up and down the hallway. And it was loud walking.
Yeah.
I should have realized it wasn't the kids because it was too loud, the walking, So in the morning, she goes to work and she uses the hallway in the bathroom because you got so much stuff, So she gets dressed and she goes to work. I get up, I go in my bathroom to brush my teeth, and there are 2 arm prints on the big mirror, like this, 6 fingers, 2 arm prints, hollow like a skeleton. Or
right.
you see the bone on both, hollow of meat, 6 fingers. So I looked at the size of it and I got a tape measure and I measured the length of it and measured my arm from elbow to finger. And the fingers were small, like a kid's finger. They were small fingers on the hands, like they don't really use their hands for doing stuff. They had like child hands. But it was 3 inches longer than my elbow to fingertip. And I'm saying to myself, okay, 3, 6, 9, 12.
No.
It's a foot taller than me. So that was in 2004. The thing I saw down the hallway was 2009. It was 5 years later. And I said, you know what? That thing in 09 has always been here, coming and going or whatever. And it left the arm prints in 2004. So it was 7 feet. It was above the door frame. And the arm prints indicated it was 7 feet by the size of the measurement. So, and that's where I started to say to myself, I don't think this was alien. I think this was a demonic entity, because then later on, I started having a lot of poltergeist activity, really big time poltergeist activity in, especially like in between. I was on TV, Hangar One series on History Channel, but we just aired season 1. And then something showed up in my house again, whether it was this thing or something else, but it was more poltergeist with banging sounds, noises, pictures lifting off the wall, my dog going crazy, looking up at the ceiling, growling, barking, spinning. But, it became a whole nother episode for this show.
When did it stop doing that then?
Well, it stopped. So that was 2014, that it showed up in June of 14. It was, I think, it was the following year, April or so of 15. I finally got the local church here to send a priest. I'm telling them there is something in my house, and they're not like, they don't, they don't want to be bothered, and that's one of the things I see with the Catholic Church. They don't want to be bothered. In my mind, job 1 is to bring people to Christ. Job 2 is to combat evil. Well, they're not interested in combating evil, probably because it's too much work and they expose themselves, But I finally get this priest to come over. He says, I can bless your house. I can't do anything more than that, because then there's a lot of paperwork. You got to prove something's going on. You got to go for psychological tests and all of that. And I said, all right, so bless the house. So he's blessing the house. And I'm saying to myself, like, why does it show up if it's demonic and not alien? And I said to him, do you believe in sins of the father? Because, I've always heard that things that your parents do, grandparents, come down 2, 3, 4 generations. Somebody's got to pay for it, So I said, do you believe in sins of the father? He turns around, and it's like I'd say he's about a 35-year-old priest. And he says to me, the devil's not real. That's just put in the Bible to scare you straight. And I said to myself, this ain't going to work. I got a priest who doesn't believe here blessing my house. How long is it? This ain't going to work. I mean, so the noises and the activity stopped for about 6 months. And then they came back, like the Bible says, 7 times stronger. Oh yeah, my God. The activity was so bad. It was like the Exorcist movie. Every night I go to bed, there'd be banging sounds on the walls, creaking sounds. It sounded like a can was being crushed. Movement is sliding sounds in the ceiling, like a dead body being dragged across the floor. I mean, this went on for 2 more years, every single night.
How did you cope with it?
I did a lot of ignoring of it, and then I met this woman on a dating site, and she had demonic activity when she went to the Catholic college here. And it's funny, I was meant to meet her, and I started telling her, and she goes, I'm gonna come over. She brought her holy water, and then she blessed the house, and it left for a while. And and then she was telling me what to say, the St. Michael prayer, put blessed pendants at the corners of your house and your property, and do all these things. And they worked for a while. So it now gets into January of 2019. So think about this, June of 2014. 4.5 years of this in my house.
Oh, God.
The January of 19. I'm surprised it didn't. Well, they want to drive you crazy, or the goal is always to get you to commit suicide, which
Yeah, of course it is.
that's never going to happen with me.
No chance.
Yeah. So I mean, that's what they want. So I have a friend up, not really close to me, about 80 miles north. He makes movies, and he goes, John, I'm making a movie called The Exorcism Prayer. 5 cases where we're going to have 5 pastors, ministers, priests, and 5 cases of demonic haunting. He goes, I want you to be one. And he says, here's the deal. I'll bring him down from Sharon, PA. I can't pay you, for the movie. He goes, but he will bless you and he will exorcise the house. He's an exorcist. He's a minister and an exorcist. And I said, come on down, So we film, and I tell my story like I'm telling you. Yeah. And so then he blesses me and he goes room to room with holy oil, holy water, blessed oil. It made the sign of the cross on every door frame, over every window, every door, through holy water, did his, the prayers and the things to drive it out of the house, and it left. It finally left. Yeah. But, there's like these, if that was a demon, which I think it was, there were still some low-level minions that are some reason allowed to come and go, every 6 months. I know when they're in the house. My dog goes crazy. You can just feel
the atmosphere, can't you?
You feel a presence, and the dog alerts me. It'll be nighttime, and then he'll start growling and barking at nothing. I get up. I have spotlights, around the house. They don't come on, so I said, okay, nobody's outside. So he'll alert me, and things like then. And somebody had said, when you start looking into them, they look into you. You get their attention. And on the demonic side, when they mark you for life. So they always come back looking for openings, looking for a way to
exactly openings to get in.
Yeah, openings to get in. And but along that process with that woman, I became a reborn Christian. I go to 2 churches, and I said to myself, it's funny. I got divorced 20 years prior to that, and I stopped going to church once I got divorced. And I had gotten to the point where I 100% completely forgot about God, didn't go to church, so it caused me to become a reborn Christian. So that was probably the point of it all. God needed a wake-up call for me, and he scared me straight with that. And
it was meant to be as well, to get it all sorted.
Yeah, and that woman, she was a very attractive woman. Looked like Sophia Loren. She was a dancer. She never had kids. Wasn't able to have kids. Very, very attractive woman. And it's like she wasn't really interested in dating me. And for about 4 years, off and on, we would date for a month or so, and it just didn't seem to work out. And I finally concluded, God sent her to me with that purpose, not the purpose of getting married or dating. And, we're still good friends. She actually married somebody else, but it was meant to be. There's so many things happen, and it's just meant to be for a reason. So you either latch on to the sign that's given you, and I could have ignored all of that and kept doing my research into the paranormal, and probably I would have lost my soul. It actually got to one night when I said to you that it came back 7 times stronger in 2016, 2 years later, where I was in my bedroom, and it was so loud with the banging and everything. And, and I know what to do. I'm commanding it out in the name of Jesus, and it would leave, but it would come back the next night, So I was at the point where I did that and it left. So I lay back in bed, and it's hard to sleep. That's one of the things, is you're not getting a lot of sleep when this is going on, because you don't know what they're going to do to you when you're asleep.
No.
And I've always said, people's dreams and stuff, you don't know if something pressed inside your body, you don't know what that is. So all of a sudden I wake up, it was probably 30 seconds later, and I look around me. It is pitch black. I was in total dark blackness. And I said to myself, this isn't right. There's a full moon. There was moonlight coming through the windows. Why am I sitting here in blackness? And
Exactly.
all the noises came back again. And I got a chill up my spine. And I said, it's going to launch an attack on me. It's at the point that it's going to do something, So I went through my commands and calling upon Jesus. But I added one thing. I said, you stood in the presence of God and you rejected him. Get out. You stood in the presence of God and you rejected him. You can't disobey the name of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ commands you to leave. Get out. It left. And
Brilliant.
yes. And what I saw was about this quick, this veil of blackness around me went up about that fast and was gone, and the moonlight came back in. So I don't know if that thing was there to take my soul, to launch one of those physical attacks on you that happen, when you see these demonic stuff. I don't know. But, like I said, I wrote a book on this called The Ufologist. I wrote another book called The String Theory of the Unexplained.
String theory, yes.
Yeah. And
that's a question from Stephen here.
Yeah.
Hi, John. Are aliens and demons the same thing? And what do you think they want from us?
Yeah. Well, I think that the contact side, now, whether there's life in space and aliens, that's a different debate, really based on whether you believe in evolution or creation. If you believe in creation, there really aren't aliens, because, the Bible doesn't talk about putting aliens out there, but God could have put them out there.
Yeah.
There's trillions of planets. He don't tell you about every planet out there either. He don't tell you about laptops. So, they don't, so I don't know. But I know from looking at the UFO alien abductions and those encounters that they are very demonic. And one of the things I did when I was doing this is I spent those 3 years reading everything on exorcism, demonology, a little bit on hauntings, just to look for markers. And I came across a book from Kenneth Ring where he compared near-death experience to alien abduction. And the thing he said was that there are, actually, that was part of my presentation. So let me just move forward a little bit and get to that. He said that. Hold on, I really want to get to that slide. There it is. So he said that if you look at near-death experience, it's life-threatening, but it's really peaceful. You're swept up into the light. Relatives are waiting for you. They examine the things you said and done in life, and then you get a choice to return. You can stay here now, or you can go back to your life, and you have your full memory. It's very emotional. Happens one time, usually to adults, right? So then he looked at close encounters of the fourth kind, or abductions, and what I did was I looked at the shared markers of demonic infestation and alien abduction, and there's about a 2/3 overlap between what happens during demonic stuff and what happens during alien abduction. So in both the demonic and the abduction, it's sudden and it's frightful. You're taken by creatures. You're not taken by your grandfather to review your life. You're taken by creatures who do a physical examination of you, and they control you at that point. You can't get out of this, and your memory, for some reason, it's like dreams where you remember your dream, but then 2 minutes later, as you get up to brush your teeth, you forget about your dream. You don't remember what it was most of the time. It's very stressful. It recurs. It starts as a child and they keep coming back. So the abduction and the demonic are very similar, and they're the polar opposite of near-death experience. So, that's my answer to that. But, some of the shared markers, though, I actually, when I do this, I put a slide up with the shared markers and how many of them happen to me and my kids. And it worries me because, are they marked also right now?
Yeah.
And I view, when I say my prayers, I always pray to protect my children. I usually don't pray for myself for anything, protect my kids and grandkids. But, to me, the Fourth Kind movie is closer to what really happens in alien abductions than this new Disclosure movie, which I'm going to go see on Friday. But it doesn't really talk about the aliens abducting people very much. They kind of gloss over that and how heinous it is. But, some of the things that happen in the demonic and the alien is, you see white smoke or a white orb. You see some sort of a hairy creature. You're scratched or bitten. You have sometimes difficulty breathing, paralysis while awake. My daughter had that. Something presses inside your body and comes out. Vivid dreams, waking up drenched in sweat. That's always happened to me. Your dog becomes agitated or provoked. A lot of waking up between 3 and 4 a.m. You feel like you're being watched. There's a presence. There's either now you get a black smoke or shadow people. I've had that. There's lost time or your memory's impaired. Someone standing at your foot of your bed. I had that. I had the guy down the hallway. My son saw something in the house in New Jersey. So, that concerns me because they had stuff happening there, while I was divorced. They target one person in the family, there's pounding or a lot of noise and shaking in the house. Personality changes. Well, that happened to my wife. I used to say to people, I don't know who she is. That's not my wife. I said, I don't know who this woman is. That's not the woman I married. Her whole personality changed. And we got divorced, there's telepathic sounds. Like I said, that voice in my head or images, I've had lucid dreams. You start to lose faith and you don't go to church anymore, which is exactly what happened to me when I got divorced. There's car or electrical devices that stall. I've never had that. Well, actually, I take that back. Some of these instances, like I have 2 jet skis, had them tuned up, everything's fine. This thing happens in the house. I go to ride the jet ski the next day, and both batteries are dead in both jet skis. That's impossible, out of body experiences or levitating. Well, I've had 2 out of body experiences. Either sexual contact with a pregnancy or some sort of hybrids. I saw 2 hybrid kids in a lucid dream. Then you're dealing with an incubus, gargoyle, or reptilian. They seem to have a hive mentality. But, the real interesting thing, and this is what's never talked about in any of these TV shows and any in the UFO field, is there's only one way to drive out aliens and demons. You call upon Jesus, and they have to leave. And Joe Jordan proved this. He wrote a book. I don't know if you know who Joe Jordan is.
I do, but I'll look him up now.
Yeah, Joe Jordan. He's all over Facebook right now because with this disclosure stuff, he's saying it's all a trick and it's going to lead to something. But what the government's telling you, it's a trick. He's 100% adamant that there are no UFOs. There are only demons tricking you. But, he was with MUFON, and I became friends with him. And I read his book. And he was an atheist that was doing an investigation down in Florida. And I think it was a Hispanic woman. And, she told him that gray alien was in her bedroom at night. She called upon Jesus to protect her. Jesus Christ, protect me. It backed away and it left. So he got permission from MUFON to go through their archives, and he found 150 cases of people who called upon God or Jesus or whoever, and the alien left. So he's up to over 400 cases right now where the name of Jesus, of God, repelled aliens and they left. Well, we know from exorcists and exorcisms, that's how you get rid of demons, and the demon is maybe the more, the stronger side of that contact, because they're there at that point to take your soul. And I think that's the ultimate thing. They're there to take your soul, or they're there to get you to commit suicide, and then they get your soul. And that's what I think is part of this. And, Whitley Strieber, he wrote that book, Communion. And, in the book, he thought it was alien. But in 1990, he did an interview, and he said he was a practicing witch, and that all the experiences he had, he brought upon himself because he was a practicing witch. So there again, I think that is proof that, that this is demonic, and it may not be alien at all, but maybe not for everybody. But I think there's a strong part of that, and then, you look at the craft that's out there. Okay, are those our craft? Do they belong to our secret space force?
Yeah.
That would probably explain everything, since Roswell. But what about older cases? Is that all demonic? I don't know. It's funny. I've done so much research into that question, that theology question. And a lot of people have said when you read, like John Milton wrote Paradise Lost, but, he said that the pyramids, King Solomon's temple, all of that were built by demons, and they can do it in one day. They can build what it takes humans, a lifetime to build. And other people have said similar things. And, so then in my mind, putting it all together, I said, okay, so maybe a lot of these cave drawings and rock petroglyphs are planted by Satan, by demons, because he knows we'll get to the point with technology that we'll discover this stuff. We'll have airplanes, we'll be, and so he planted that stuff as it's going to be part of that big trick, the deception that they talk about in the Bible. So I don't know, it's a topic that, you can't really get an answer to, but it's a very strange subject.
It is. Steph's just saying, yes, but what happens if I'm not a Christian?
Well, that's a good question. Whether I think if you're an atheist, I think there's no hope for you. I think, with these other faiths, here's the thing is, a Buddhist or a Hindu, they have gods, but they have multi-gods. So they have pagan religions, and pagan religions are really demonic. Just like pre-Christian in Egypt, they were worshiping the god of this, the god of that, the god of that. They were really fallen angels that they were worshiping and seeing and experiencing. So, it's a tough question, but I know that people have driven out these aliens by calling upon God because they had a firm belief in God. Even though they might have 168 gods, but they had a firm belief in God and they were able to draw it out. So I think it's a matter of what you believe in. If you truly in your heart and soul believe in God, then you can combat demons. If you don't believe in God, I don't think it's much you're going to be able to do, because then you get to the point where certain people lose the protection of God. And once you lose his protection because he knows you've lost your soul, you've given up, you don't believe in him anymore, I think then you're open for everything, alien abduction, demonic.
Oh, lots of attachments then.
Yeah, and you get these attachments and everything. And I wonder, those 20 years that I was so involved in MUFON and UFOs, how many attachments did I have?
Loads.
It's going to sound crazy, but when all of that was going on in my house, I had driven it out with the prayers, the coins, the holy oil, all of that stuff. And this was before that priest came. But then it got to the point where it couldn't get in my house. And I'll give you 2 examples. I go to bed. It's like 10:20 at night. All of a sudden, outside my house, you hear a bang. Boom! Because it got so angry it couldn't get in the house. My dog ran downstairs to the front door barking. I went down, but I said, okay, the spotlights didn't come on. I'm trying to look out the door. I don't see anything. Right? So I go to bed. I get up in the morning. There's a text from my neighbor at 10:23 at night. She says, John, did you hear that loud bang? It sounded like a deer ran into our garage, or a utility pole exploded, the transformer. And I knew, so she heard it. So that was that thing, couldn't get in. And then I'm talking to my neighbor 3-4 doors down, and he goes, John, he goes to my UFO conferences. He goes, John, strange things happening. He goes, we go to bed at night and we hear these loud bangs. It sounds like in the attic. It sounds like somebody dropped a car on the house, And I said, yeah, that's I'm going through this demonic attack right now. And I've driven it out and it's looking for another victim. So it's checking you out. It's checking you out right now. His jaw dropped. Like, what? But that's proof that, that is real. And then also when I decided to write my book, The Ufologist and String Theory of the Unexplained, ufologist is all my experiences. The string theory of the unexplained is that, plus I looked at all this evidence that aliens are demonic, and that's like an additional 200 pages of the book. And I looked at a lot of UFO cases, and I saw all those markers that I talked about. And I said, I don't think Carl Turner, Betty Andresian, those aren't alien cases. Those are demonic cases. And those people didn't recognize what they were dealing with. So, interesting. And I'll tell you one other thing. Hold on.
Go on, you're all right. Got another question here as well.
Yeah, hold on. I'll tell you one other thing. When I started writing that book, I put the blessed pendants at the 4 corners of the property, 4 corners of the house, so it couldn't get into my whole property. So I'm sitting here with this laptop writing my story, The Ufologist. I look up, I got 2 acres. I see a fire in the woods. It's moving against the wind. The wind's coming this way and the fire is moving this way.
That way.
It never entered my fence line. The fire was on the other side of the fence. And I see 3 people. I live next to a cemetery. I have a stockade fence there. I see 3 people in the cemetery. So I call the police. Or I call, the 911. And I said, I think there's a couple of teenagers, and they probably poured lighter fluid and lit it up, thinking it's funny because it's moving in a straight line along my fence line, outside the fence line. Right. And he goes, nope, that was just called in by these guys in the cemetery. So I said, okay. So they sent 3 fire trucks to put this fire out because there was no, they couldn't get the water. So they brought fire trucks, and it was 2 acres. So it's far back. And if they didn't put it out, the whole freaking wood, it's a whole wooded back, that whole wooded area. Yeah. So, but then later in the day, a couple hours later, and I got pictures of this, I get a call. I had ordered my headstone, which I put in this, and it's 6 feet tall, and it says the Holy Bible on the side. Very religious headstone. It's like I said, granite, 6 feet tall, and those 3 guys were there to install it. So think about this: the moment that they got the headstone in place, cemented it in, and put it in place of the Holy Bible with front and back, being my headstone.
Yeah.
God burst into flames. And think about, when you do an exorcism, they remove all the items from the bedroom, except for a light and an end table. but because demons can burst rugs into flames, curtains into flames, they have the ability to burst things into flames. They got so angry, they saw that I would be buried under a religious headstone. They'd never get to me, to my body, and they set the woods on fire, and I believe that 100%.
My God.
Yeah, I mean the story. That's why I said people should read my book. Somebody should make a movie out of this because it's so truthful and so intense what I went through in this UFO field, after I got divorced.
Good. Yeah, a good movie that would be.
It would be. And you had Vice President Vance in March say that he's really interested in this whole UFO question, but he says he believes that they're demons. It's not aliens, that this is a spiritual thing. And Tucker Carlson has said the same thing. Now you get more people coming out of the woodwork saying the same thing, what this is. But, this disclosure going on right now, it's so phony. They're not giving you any proof. They're telling you stories we heard 30 years ago. It's like, and everybody involved is a government person, right? They all work for the government and they're whistleblowers. They're whistleblowers to tell us the truth. Bull. I want to see their tax return because I guarantee you they're still being paid by the government.
Exactly. I reckon so as well. There's another question from Rebecca. I was taught by the nuns, and I was told that the devil would send you to Dalmatians for not being good. Is this correct teaching, John?
Well, I've talked to people about purgatory and things like that, and there isn't really anything in the Bible that specifically says you're going to go suffer for a certain number of years for not being good, or like Dante's Inferno. But there are things in the Bible where Jesus warns you. There's a couple of where I don't remember what the passage was, but he's talking to somebody and he says to him, you risk the Gehenna, which is the fire, the Gehenna, which is hell, right? And then there's another story where Jesus, it's in the Bible, where he's talking to somebody about something they did or a question they're asking. And he says to him, you risk the outer darkness. And I think, the Bible doesn't talk about ghosts other than the Holy Ghost, right? But I think that when he said you risk the outer darkness, I mean, I know the spirit world's real, the ghostly world's real, poltergeist, all of that, some of the stuff in my house that's happened. So I think that's the outer darkness. That's people that aren't good or bad, or and so you're not going to heaven, which is the long sleep until the end, because you go into like a long sleep, and you're not going to hell because you're not a murderer, you're not a rapist, so you're not going to either of those places. So the bulk of the people go into this outer darkness because you sinned a lot, but not major cardinal sins, let's say. And you're in this, it's like that movie. Remember where he goes to save his son? And he goes into this darkness, and there's a demon there, and he's got to get his son out, and he's running into these people and stuff like that. I can't think of the name of the movie, but I think a lot of people risk going to the outer darkness when they die. And, if you think of mediums and stuff, they're able to contact these people. And I read a couple of books with psychologists, psychiatrists, and they would bring a medium in because they sensed that the person had a demonic attachment causing them a lot of problems. And then they would try to convince the person it had attachments to the person. Those attachments they would convince to unattach and leave. So, then there's a point, I think, where maybe there's the light, like the Poltergeist movie. You're in that darkness, but there's a point where there's light and you got to go to the light. And if you don't, because you're afraid or you don't know, you get stuck in the outer darkness. So, and in my mind, there has to be something that happens, even though the Bible says that, when all you need to go to heaven is to truly believe and repent. And, and I became a reborn Christian because all of this, and I truly believe, and I've gone to confession and repented every single thought and thing I've ever done in 69 years. But I think that there's a big difference between forgiveness and being able to get into heaven, and justice. There's a difference between justice and forgiveness, because God will forgive you because now you fully believe 100% and he knows what you're thinking. But
Yeah.
where's the justice for the people you harmed, for the things you did? You still got this stain in your soul. And I think there is a form of a purgatory or a cleansing, and maybe you go and, they review your life's deeds and they say, okay, you got 41 demerits. That's 3 years in the fire. You killed somebody. That's 18 years in the fire. And the fire isn't to torture you. The fire is to burn the sins out of your soul so you can come out of the fire and enter heaven. Because I don't think dirty people can enter heaven, no matter what you believe, even if you became reborn. I just don't think with that kind of stain on you that you could actually enter heaven.
True.
That's what I think.
True. Yeah, there's just before we go, John Allen in the chat room is from Australia. No real full disclosure, or basically soft disclosure to keep people happy and lose interest in UFOs and seeing the UAPs.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people falling for it, because, if you haven't really researched this, the average Joe is going to this disclosure movie, believing it. Oh, it's good. And, if you haven't researched it, you're falling for this whole thing. The only good thing is it's taken the tin foil hat out of this, where, when I ran for county commissioner in 2019, the headline of the newspaper, local resident, former head of a UFO organization, wants to run for county commissioner. I said, wait a second, that's not the press release I sent you. I didn't say a word about UFOs. And, and they brought it up. They didn't bring it up when I ran in 2023, but when I ran for governor of Pennsylvania, they brought it up in a couple of articles, just briefly, that I do the UFO stuff. And then when I ran for lieutenant governor last month, none of the media brought it up, but my opponent, he did TV commercials, and she shows me teaching a UFO class, and the slide is my book, The Case for UFOs. He zoomed in on that so you can see I'm a UFO nut. But, for the most part, you're not a nut anymore, because I talked to reporters and they said, yeah, we can't bring that up anymore. And I said, yeah, there you go. You can't slander me.
Steph, we just said before we go, look at all the cover-ups within the Catholic Church.
Look at all the what?
The cover-ups within the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Well, and you get this exorcist out of Washington, D.C. last week. He said that the alien is demonic, and they demoted him. He's no longer an exorcist. It's funny. I went down to D.C. about 4 or 5 years ago, and the guy's name, Rossetti, I kept saying, that sounds so familiar with me. And I finally remembered when I went to D.C., I went to this huge National Shrine church, and in the bookstore, I bought his book. It's something of American Exorcists. Whatever the name of the book was. And there it is, Rossetti. So this is, that book, I underlined so much stuff. It was part of my research and, adding that to my book, The String Theory. But they demote the guy because he says that it's demonic, and that's what it is. I mean, you get J.D. Vance, the vice president, said it. I don't understand how they can demote this guy. And, you only have 150 exorcists in the whole country. You're supposed to have one for every diocese. I think there's 400 or 600 dioceses. So you're really short on exorcists. This is one of the top exorcists. He does, I think he was saying he does a dozen exorcisms a week, and now you don't have an exorcist there. So there are so many things that the Catholic Church does. And I'm Catholic. I alternate between Catholic and non-denominational, 1 week one the other. I go to Catholic only because I know the ritual has power. It drives the demons out. That's what worked, is the Bible, the rituals. And in the way that they've been said for 2,000 years, 1,500 years, they have a lot of power over the demonic. And so I go there, but then I go to the non-denominational because he gives a good, when he talks, it's very interesting and powerful, where the priest doesn't really say a whole lot, But one last thing. There's a guy, Carl Nell. He's a retired Army colonel. He said that the actual proof for disclosure will be released October 1st, 2030. So we shall see.
Well, I'm hoping I'll still be around by then.
Yeah. So they're going to drag this out 4 more years.
Just before you go, Rick Allen just said, can you tell us about why string theory fits your world view?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking of a name to talk about this whole thing, the aliens not, being more of a trick, and we've never been able to get any DNA, any parts from a UFO, although they claim the government has them. So, and then when you watch shows on TV, string theory says this is possible, and when they explain the universe. And so string theory is basically a fake theory in a lot of ways in physics, that when the real physics don't add up, they throw it into string theory, and string theory then says, but it's possible, and this is that. So I said, how do I explain this? I'm writing this book on what happened to me, and the fact that so many UFO cases are demonic. They're not aliens, and we can't explain this whole thing anyhow. Nobody's got any proof of anything as far as the UFO field goes. So I said, well, that's string theory, because you don't really have any proof, but something's going on. You just don't know how to explain it. We don't know. So that's why I called it string theory of the unexplained. So the unexplained is what I'm explaining. So that's where that came from. And then the other book, which is a diary of my encounters, I just called it The Ufologist. And hopefully people understand it's a ufologist and I'm not a urologist.
I like that one.
I don't want to be a urologist.
Where can people get your books?
Just go to Amazon and just put my name in, John Ventre, Ventre. There's no U in my name. It's not Venture. It's Ventre, with one E at the end. And there's 14 books there, and I think they're so cool. I wrote 3 last year. One was that, what I was telling you about, Templars versus Indians. But I wrote 2 others, Alien 911, which is all the most horrific UFO cases, crashes, injuries, and deaths. And then I wrote another one called Do You Know? And it's everything I know about UFOs and everything I know about the paranormal. So somebody like a beginner, and even people who think they know a lot, if you read this, you'll know twice as much.
If people want to get in touch with you with any information about anything, where can they reach you?
Yeah, if you go to johnventre.com, that's my website. I got 135 free videos and lectures there. But there's a way to contact me from that. Just like through my political page, vote for voteforventre.com. That's the political side of me. There's a spot there to contact me. So either one of those, if you just fill that out, it sends me an email, and that email goes to my email.
Wonderful. It's always brilliant when you're on the show. We always have a great time.
Yeah, thank you.
So next time you come on, we'll talk about that new book.
Yeah, we'll talk about all my books. If we talk, there's a reason behind every one of the books why I wrote it, and that in itself is an interesting story.
It is, yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody in the chat room. My guest on Friday is, I just remember, it's a UK guy as well.
You know Brian Allen?
John Kinley.
John Kinley. Do you know Brian Allen?
That rings a bell.
He's in Scotland. He's not far from you. And he's the editor of Steve Meara's Phenomena magazine. You should
yes, I think I do now.
Yeah, Brian Allen. He's written some really good books. I learned a lot from him. I went to Scotland and actually had lunch with him. It was like 4 hours.
Oh, brilliant. Right. I'll be in touch with him.
Okay.
So thank you again. Good
All
night
right.
and God bless.
Yeah.
Bye
Sounds
for
good.
now.
Thank you.